Hey everyone, welcome back to the penultimate episode. Oh my god, see, I can't even talk already. Sorry guys, me and Taz are having a day where we can't talk. The penultimate episode of season 7, Twisted. I just want to start off this episode by talking about January because I don't know about you, Taz, but I feel like I've not had a minute to breathe this month, and it's
Yeah,
catching up
not
with
only
me.
that, I feel like everyone's in their kind of dry Jan era, and I'm like, I can't relate. I'm like,
Oh
I've
girl,
got
no.
more than I can, like more weekends than there have been. So I don't know, like it's been crazy. And then work on top of that, like it was straight back to work.
Straight back into it. I
You
can't lie, I do not participate in dry Jan, but I don't really drink that much
know?
in December. Like December's not like a crazy drinking month for me, really. So like I'm not participating in dry Jan. You think I'm going like a whole 30 days of without an Aperol? You are sorely mistaken. It's not happening.
Sorely
But also,
mistaken.
can we talk about all the dramas that's going on in Jan already?
Oh my
Because
God, I
I don't
know.
know about you, but I'm so invested in this like Brooklyn Beckham drama.
I know. It was outrageous. Like I actually can't believe he posted that all on his story.
I know, and then like I'm just seeing like all the memes about it are actually killing me off. And I actually have a funny story
Oh
about
God,
this.
yeah.
Do you remember when I told you, and I don't know if some of the listeners will remember, when I told you guys about a poll competition that I did back in October, and I was telling you about how I think I'm like, did we include this on the podcast?
I
I
don't know
don't know
if
if we
we
cut it out.
in the edit because it was too X-rated.
Do you know what? I'm going to tell you guys anyway. So even if we cut it out of that episode, it's going in this one. But
It's going in this one.
basically, at this competition, there was a competitor who took a wad of cash out of somewhere on her body, shall we just say?
Yeah.
And she posted a clip of her performance the other day on Instagram with the caption Victoria Beckham at Brooklyn's wedding. And I was just cracking up and I was like, I meant to send it to you to be honest, but I forgot. But yeah, all the memes are
Kieran
just
has been
killing me off.
losing his mind over the AI
Oh, for God's sake.
like recreations of Victoria Beckham at Brooklyn's wedding, and he's like, oh, I just can't get over them. They're so funny because they're just like Victoria Beckham dancing so inappropriately, but obviously it's really fake. But
I'm the one that's made me think the most is I saw one and it was like uh Brooklyn Brooklyn's wedding photographer or videographer, like knowing that they have the footage that everybody wants to see, and I'm like, oh my god, I wonder if
oh
anyone has
my
actually filmed it.
gosh.
Yeah, when we say inappropriate, like what do we mean? Because my idea of inappropriate is probably quite different to most people's.
Yours is
'Cause
like inappropriate is just not
I don't
inappropriate
think
for
there's a
you.
limit. Like I don't think
Yeah.
anything's. I'm just like I don't care. Like do what you want. Pop off. Pull a
But
wad of
then when you've
cash
got
out of
family
wherever.
members involved, it's a bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that is true actually. Anyway, so we're off to a crazy start. Brooklyn Beckham drama. What do you guys think of this drama? Are you invested? Are you not invested? And I'm excited to see what drama 2026 brings. What other
Oh my
celebrity
God.
tea are we gonna see? I fear something with the Kardashians brewing. I think it's about time something dramatic happens.
Yeah, and if
You know
you're
what I
a
mean?
Harry Styles fan, obviously, we've got the album, guys. We've got the album.
Oh, Taz is very
Liv's
excited
not
about
a
this.
massive fan, but I don't know. I've become a bit obsessed with Harry Styles, so I'm excited
I
for
feel
a
like
tour.
I need to give his new album a listen, or just him in general, because I don't know many of his songs, to be honest. But Taz, don't be encouraging our listeners to turn this episode off and go and listen to Harry Styles. That's not what we're
Yeah,
trying to
listen
encourage here.
after.
So let us shut up about Harry Styles and random celebrity drama and get into today's episode. Welcome to the So Cultured podcast.
Where we explore science and tech unfiltered.
We're your hosts, Liv and Taz, two girls who love STEM and spilling the tea.
Each season, we take on a new theme, whether it's busting conspiracy theories, celebrating women in STEM, or breaking down the science in your favourite sci-fi films.
And of course, in every episode, we spill the LABORATEA,
where we share your wildest stories from the world of science.
Let's get into this week's episode of So Cultured. If I told you that less than a century ago, a group of trained doctors ran a secret research unit where no one who walked in ever walked back out, you would probably think I was exaggerating. But this actually happened. And every single person used as a subject inside this facility died. There were no survivors. And what took place there is widely considered the worst human experimentation in history. This was Unit 731. Now, what makes Unit 731 so disturbing isn't just the scale of suffering, it's that this was organised institutional science. Surgeons, microbiologists, and researchers carried out experiments on infection, immunity, hypothermia, and trauma. They then recorded the data and published the results, all while completely erasing consent and humanity. Today, we're going to break down what they were trying to study, why the science itself failed, and what this story teaches us about how dangerous science becomes when ethics are treated as optional. And here is a content warning for today's episode, because this episode contains discussion of extreme human experimentation and medical violence, including harm to civilian women and children, and so listener discretion is advised.
Oh my gosh, I've actually not really heard of Unit 731 before. Like, obviously you've heard of Auschwitz, and we've obviously covered that on this series, but I obviously don't know that much about Unit 731, so I don't know like where it was, why it existed, so maybe we should start there.
Yeah, I feel like that's like so common. Like, I have mentioned for a few people that I'm doing this episode, they're like my friends and my family, they're so cute. They're always like, what are you doing your episode on this week? And I've said like, oh, Unit 731, and a lot of people don't actually know about it. And that's kind of the point, right? We always say that's the point of this series. Unit 731 was actually deliberately buried in history for decades. Now, on paper, it was a disease prevention and water purification department, but in reality, it was a covert biological warfare research unit built to study how disease, environment, and trauma could be used as weapons. And it wasn't just operating like on the fringes, it was staffed, like I said, by trained doctors and scientists publishing research and treating what they were doing as legitimate science, which is a trend that we have seen on this series.
What the hell? It's kind of as if they like try and hid it by saying it was disease prevention or something, and
Yes, and water
purification.
Which
What?
sounds weird, but that was related to like cholera, right? Because cholera is like a disease that's carried like,
Oh,
yeah. We'll get more into that.
okay. So they were like, okay, kind of touching on it, but obviously not. So when you say legitimate science, do you mean they were asking the same kinds of questions like real researchers were asking at the time, or was it just like you say, a cover story?
Yeah, so before we answer that properly, we kind of need to zoom out a bit, right? Because Unit 731 didn't obviously just come out of nowhere. It grew out of a very specific political and scientific moment, and it was actually driven in large part by just one person. And that person was 𝗰cie 𝗫𝗃, who was a military doctor who believed that disease could be weaponized in a way that conventional weapons couldn't. So his idea was that epidemics don't just kill people, but they actually destabilize societies because they overwhelm hospitals, they disrupt things like supply chains, they obviously spread really unpredictably, and they create a lot of fear and panic in communities. And from his point of view, understanding how to cause and control that kind of disruption was just as important as understanding guns or bombs. Now, in the early 1930s, 𝗰cie was given backing to test these ideas in occupied territory where secrecy was easier to maintain. Before Unit 731 formally existed, he set up an earlier experimental site known as the Zongma Fortress, just outside of Harbin. Now, Harbin is a city in northeastern China in the region known as Manchuria, which had been occupied by Japan after the invasion in 1931. And that location mattered because it was under Japanese military control, but far from public scrutiny in Japan itself. Now, Zongma Fortress was effectively a sealed compound where prisoners could be detained and experimented on without oversight. So inside, prisoners were deliberately infected with diseases like plague and cholera. They were exposed to extreme conditions and in some cases subjected to early vivisection. And if you don't know what vivisection means, it's basically where you are, I've given my trigger warning, it's where you are cut open, where you're still alive.
What?
Now, these were smaller scale and less systematized than what came later, but in Zongma Fortress, essentially, they were already testing the same ideas about disease progression and human limits. And what became clear very quickly was that the site was unstable. So security in the fortress was quite poor, prisoners often resisted, and there was actually at least one attempted escape. And that alarmed military leadership, not because of the human cost. So they wasn't worried about the safety of this person getting out. They were just worried that with this person getting out, all the information about what they was actually doing inside this facility would also get out and expose them.
Gosh. I mean, obviously, but I guess like it was already obvious at that point that this couldn't survive any kind of like public scrutiny at all. I mean, obviously, but I think the fact that this precedes Unit 731 and they were already thinking those things is kind of crazy.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's what a lot of people say, that's like Zongma Fortress was just kind of a proof of concept, but it also showed 𝗾𝘁 and the military that if they wanted to continue this kind of, if we can call it work, if we can call it research, like if they wanted to continue this, basically it just needed to be bigger, it needed to be more controlled, and also far more secretive. So the fortress ended up shutting down, and its failure was used to justify building something much more permanent. And that's when the program was expanded, formalized, and rebuilt in the Pingfang district, becoming what we now know as Unit 731. And this time, the facility was actually designed from the ground up for secrecy. So it actually had like underground tunnels that led to secret labs. It had cremation facilities and systems that allowed prisoners to be processed, experimented on, and disposed of without witnesses.
What on earth? That is crazy that they're organizing all of this, like the cremation facilities. They already know that there's going to be fatalities and deaths as a result of what they're doing in there. Like, it just blows my mind.
Yeah, I feel like it's like something that we would see in like a horror film. And we're not going to talk about MK Ultra on this series, but I think it's a topic that we're both really interested in. So we're going to revisit it at some point. I'm sure it's going to make its way into some series, but even things like MK Ultra is like, you would think that's a conspiracy theory, but it's not. Like, these things actually do happen, and it's crazy.
Yeah, it is actually mad. And it's just, I mean, we've covered a lot of like crazy stuff on this season for that exact reason. And it's just crazy how much stuff is covered up as well. But we're talking biological weapons, biological warfare. Was there not like an agreement that like that was not like people or countries around the globe were not going to do that?
Yeah, no, you're so right. And this is where wording really matters. And for any of the listeners who don't know, essentially there was this thing called the Geneva Protocol, which banned basically the use of chemical and biological weapons in war. But the key thing about the Geneva Protocol is, although they're saying, yeah, we won't use this in war, it actually doesn't ban research into them. So as long as the work could be framed as defensive or related to public health, it was technically permitted under the Geneva Protocol. So Unit 731 wasn't presented as a weapons program. Instead, it was framed as a disease prevention and water purification unit, which focused on protecting soldiers from outbreaks and improving sanitation. So on paper, it looked like public health, but in reality, it gave 𝗾𝘁 and his team political and legal cover to continue exactly what they had already started at the Zongma Fortress, just on a much larger and far more organized scale.
It's actually crazy how they're like trying to find loopholes around basically experimenting on humans and looking at biological weapons. But I'm guessing, like, obviously we are talking biological warfare, but not necessarily going to be used in war, but researching it. So surely it couldn't have happened like just anywhere.
Yeah, no, 100%. So like Zongma Fortress, Unit 731 also wasn't built in Japan. It was also built in occupied Manchuria, which is in the northeast of China. And that mattered because occupation changed how the military viewed the people living there, because Manchuria was under Japanese control, but it wasn't obviously treated as equal territory. And so the local population had no legal protection, and that made it possible to operate a facility like this away from public scrutiny. So, as I've said a few times, on paper, the site was a disease prevention and water purification department, but it was also known as a lumber mill, and that's where the term 𝗰𝗃𝗃 comes from, meaning logs. And the prisoners weren't referred to as people, patients, or even prisoners, but as materials. So, essentially, they called the prisoners 𝗰𝗃𝗃s. And they would even call, like, so when the prisoners went in, they were separated, like males and females were separated up, and they would actually call like the living quarters like the male log cabin and the female log cabin.
Oh my gosh, that is messed up.
Yeah, it's literally crazy. I mean, it's all just dehumanization. It's so sad. But most of the people taken there, as I said, were Chinese civilians or prisoners of war, along with Russians and others caught during the occupation. And as I said before, no one who entered Unit 731 as a prisoner ever left alive. And from the outside, it looked like a military base, but inside, it was a system designed to extract data until the subject died.
Gosh, that is crazy. I think the statistic that you say where literally no one survived and no one came out alive is just like really harrowing. And obviously we do cover Auschwitz and other places, but like you do hear of like survivor stories and stuff, so it's kind of crazy that you don't get that from Unit 731. Obviously we've spoken about it being like disease prevention and for military preparedness. What were they actually doing inside the facility then? Like, what kind of experiments were being run and what did they claim they were trying to learn?
Yeah, good question. So the main category of experiments that they were doing, and we're using the terms experiments and research very loosely here, but the main category was infectious disease research. And on paper, the questions that they claimed they were asking were not unusual for the time. So they said that they were studying pathogenesis, which is how a disease develops inside the body. And they were interested in things like incubation periods, how pathogens spread through tissues, and what ultimately causes organ failure. And at this point in history, scientists knew what caused diseases like plague or cholera, but they still didn't understand why outcomes varied so much between people, why some infections stayed local while others became systemic, or why fever tipped into sepsis in some cases. And they were also apparently interested in how things like nutrition, temperature, and physical stress altered this immune response. So those were the real gaps in the knowledge at the time that they were apparently trying to address. So, to carry out this work, prisoners were brought into the complex and usually taken underground almost immediately. And as I said before, Unit 731 had an extensive network of underground tunnels connecting prison cells to laboratories to operating rooms and then the disposal areas, which meant people could be moved, experimented on, and killed without ever being seen by the surrounding population. So, prisoners were deliberately infected with pathogens such as Yersinia pestis, which causes plague, Vibrio cholerae, Salmonella typhi, and anthrax. And in some cases, the dose and timing of infection were controlled, which they believed would let them study dose response relationships, essentially, whether higher bacterial loads led to faster or more severe disease. And from that point onward, the person was treated as a biological system under observation rather than a patient. So, researchers tracked fever curves, symptom onset, and time to deterioration, paying particular attention to when infection crossed from survivable to fatal, because that threshold mattered for apparently both battlefield medicine and bioweapons planning. And one of the more harrowing details that came out of this is that apparently once they had been infected, doctors and surgeons, again using the term loosely, were really interested in seeing how it affected their organs. So unfortunately, the fate for most of these people is that they would be taken to an operating room where they would actually be vivisected, so quite literally cut open alive, so that doctors or surgeons could look at their organs and see how diseases were actually affecting their organs, which is just absolutely, like, I can't even put into words how sad and horrific that is.
Yeah, that is actually crazy to think that people were essentially being like dissected whilst they were still alive, all in the name. I mean, it's just so, like, obviously this whole thing is inhumane, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, we don't even do that when we do animal studies.
Yeah.
Not that there should necessarily be any difference between what we're saying with humans and animal studies, but like,
There's no, like, yeah, I get what you're saying. Like, there's no scientific basis for them doing that. It's not like
No.
something we were doing in animals at the time, which, yeah, still wouldn't be like humane on any level. But yeah, it's like what made them decide to even do that. And a lot of people who talk about Unit 731, they literally do just say, like, the doctors, and we'll get more to it as we go through the episode, but the doctors and scientists just literally got to a point where they were just like, let's just do this just to see what happens.
That's crazy. That's
Mm-hmm.
like science unleashed on another level. But like obviously we're talking like you say very loosely about science here. But like a lot of what you've said sounds very similar to like the kind of questions modern infectious disease researchers still ask. Like even during like the COVID-19 pandemic, we were asking things like what causes there to be an incubation period? How long is it? If you're infected with a higher
Mm-hmm.
dose of virus, is your incubation period smaller, or do you have a worse disease? So, like
Mm-hmm.
all of these things that you've mentioned, they sound very legitimate, but I can
Yeah.
imagine they're probably not. I mean, firstly, it's you're talking about doing it on human patients, so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but I find that
No,
interesting
a
that
hundred
they're
percent. That
legit
is,
questions.
yeah, 100%. And I feel like, yeah, essentially they had like a good cover story, right? Because this is the
Mm,
whole point. They were legitimate scientists who actually had the ability to ask real scientific questions. But then in the same breath, like, their whole thing breaks down scientifically because infectious disease is incredibly sensitive to confounding variables. So we know that, like, for example, immune response is shaped by nutrition, stress hormones, how hydrated we are, if we've had any prior illness, and things like
mm,
injury. And here's the thing, is that the scientists knew this, and they also knew that the prisoners were already malnourished. They were dehydrated, sometimes purposely dehydrated. They were just in general very traumatized and often recovering from earlier experiments that they had been subjected to. And many of them were infected sequentially with multiple pathogens. And that means you are unable to isolate variables, right? So you can't say
mm,
whether, if you see organ failure, for example, you can't say whether it's due to bacterial load, immune collapse,
mm,
starvation, or shock. So the system is biologically noisy, which literally makes the data meaningless. So it's
mm.
like, although they had the ability to ask these good scientific questions, the actual way they were tackling them was extremely poor. And I think a lot of people
Yeah.
can claim ignorance in this situation and say, like, it was just bad science. But similar to what we said with the Tuskegee study, and with we talked about like Mengele's twin experiments at Auschwitz, I do not claim ignorance. I think it's literally just
Mm-mm.
them dressing their torture, or
Yeah.
dressing like their, do you know what I mean? Like, it's just an excuse for their
Yeah.
twisted, sick, I don't know if fantasies is the right word, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like morbid, like their own morbid curiosity, just like on an extreme level. I think that's
Yeah.
literally what it is. It's not science. It's
Yeah.
just like them being like, oh, let's just do this because I'm curious, and it's like horrific stuff.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think you're so right. Um, and I feel like that's backed up even more. I mean, I just said obviously about like vivisection, but yeah, they introduced vivisection at different stages of infection, and they claimed that it allowed direct observation of organ damage without the interference of anesthesia. But in reality, cutting into a conscious body causes an immediate surge in stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, massive
Mm.
inflammation, circulatory collapse, and shock. So from a physiological standpoint, they instantly override any disease specific processes that they were apparently trying to study. So, when they said they were measuring infection driven organ failure, what they were actually measuring was trauma induced multi organ collapse.
Yeah, that is literally crazy. I think it's really interesting what you said about like there not just not being any there's no controls at all. So like you say,
Yeah.
they don't know what's attributed to what. Like it's just all stupid.
No, 100%. Like, this is a theme that we spoke about so many times, is that the science itself was just inherently awful. As you said, no true control groups. no standardized baselines, and no way to actually establish cause and effect. So even by the scientific standards of the 1930s, that violated basic principles of experimental designs. So what they produced were observations without context and numbers without literally any meaning. And honestly, I just think they quite obviously didn't care. And again, I'm not claiming ignorance. I know some people would just be like, oh, they were just, no, they knew exactly. They just didn't care. They were just seeing what they could get away with, honestly. But even if they had convinced themselves that this counted as valid disease research, let's just say they did, right? They then applied the same logic to other systems in the body as well. So they started looking at things like temperature regulation, physical trauma, reproduction. And that is where a lot of people say the experiments escalated even further, and where the science becomes even more obviously disconnected from reality.
I'm actually scared about this because with everything that you've already described, like how the prisoners were already obviously in like a bad state and they were infected with multiple pathogens, like I genuinely don't know how this could get any worse. So, but I'm guessing it does, but I'm
It
intrigued to hear.
does. No, it does. And yeah, as I just said, this is where the experiments move away from infectious disease and into human physiology. So, one of the most infamous sets of experiments carried out by Unit 731 focused on hypothermia and frostbite. Now, on paper, the justification was that Japanese soldiers were fighting in extremely cold regions of northern China and they were at risk of severe cold injury. So, the unit claimed it was studying how frostbite developed and how best to treat it. From a physiological perspective, this is obviously a real problem because when the body is exposed to extreme cold, blood vessels in the skin constrict to preserve heat for vital organs. And so, if exposure continues, ice crystals actually begin to form inside your cells, which physically rupture cell membranes and cause tissue death. Now, when tissue is rewarmed, sudden blood flow can trigger inflammation, clotting, and further damage. And even today, frostbite treatment is complex. So at the time, there were actual, real, genuine gaps in understanding. So what Unit 731 wanted was direct observation of how cold injury progressed in human tissue, which is something that ethical medicine would obviously never allow. So to achieve this, prisoners were taken outside during winter and forced to expose limbs to freezing temperatures, often by putting arms or legs in ice water or leaving them bare in the cold for extended periods. I even heard, probably, which I think is like one of the saddest stories I personally came across when I was researching Unit 731. And by the way, I could sit here all day and tell you about all the different stories that I read, and I feel like it would still not encapsulate the true horror that went on in Unit 731. But one of the horrible stories that I read about was the story of a 3-year-old boy whose hands were actually submerged in ice cold water with salt, and they were essentially deliberately giving him frostbite so that they could see how his body would respond, which is obviously absolutely harrowing to hear. And it's
What?
just so sad. I know, but honestly, when I was reading about it, like genuinely, I felt sick to my stomach. Like I actually felt sick. Like it's so sad. Another crazy story that came out of witness testimony described guards actually striking the frozen limbs with sticks because they wanted to check whether the tissue had actually frozen solid. And apparently, they were actually listening for a hollow sound that indicated ice formation within the muscle. So once frostbite had clearly developed, the next phase began, which is where different rewarming methods were tested. And so some limbs were immersed in hot water, while others were exposed to literal open flames, and others were just left to thaw slowly at room temperature. And the researchers were apparently observing how quickly tissue died, whether gangrene developed, and how long it took before the limb became non-functional. Now, in many cases, the damaged limb was then amputated so that the internal effects of cold injury could be examined directly. And these amputations were often performed without anesthetic, under the belief that pain relief would interfere with physiological responses. Muscles, nerves, and blood vessels were dissected to study how cold damage spread through different tissue layers. What they claimed they were studying was frostbite pathology, but what they were actually doing was just deliberately destroying healthy limbs to see how much damage the human body could actually withstand.
Sorry, like when you were talking about the 3-year-old, this entire time I've just been picturing
I know,
like a
I
grown
know.
man. And then you mentioned like a 3-year-old boy, and I was like, what?
Yeah,
Like, obviously, that doesn't really like take away from the fact that like a man is being experimented on, but like, who the hell could bring themselves to do that to a child? Like, that's
right.
actually crazy. I don't
I know,
know.
but
Like,
it's,
that's just
it's
added a
similar
whole
to,
new
yeah, no,
thing.
100%. I felt the exact same way, like the exact same way. Because I feel like, in a way, to obviously not the, like, an adult ever having to experience anything close to this is okay for us to hear about. And,
Mm,
like, do you know what I mean? But I agree that when you hear about it being done to children, it just adds a whole new layer of like evil and sadness. Like, I was the same. And I
yeah.
genuinely, last night, I mean, I told Taz last night that I was watching some documentaries on this, and I genuinely, my whole drive home last night, I was just thinking about it. I actually could not stop thinking about it. It was just so sad.
Gosh, yeah. I think like when we've been doing the research for some of these for some of these episodes, it's been kind of like you do think about it for a while. Like it's like
Yeah,
quite
like, it stays with you. Yeah.
triggering and like it stays with you and you're like, how on earth was that actually a thing? But from a biological point of view, like none of this actually makes sense because cold injury, like you say, is dependent on so many things. Like everyone has like different circulation. You're also talking about doing this on a child versus an adult. And
Hmm.
like you said before, that the prisoners had poor nutrition, that would affect it. Stress. If you're
Hmm.
stressed, you like circulation doesn't your circulation like get limited to your extremities as well? So
No,
yeah.
100%. Literally exactly the same. And it's exactly the same with the disease studies. But like this specifically, yeah, I mean, it literally, because of everything you just said, it literally means that the results don't tell you how a healthy soldier would respond in the field, right? So it's literally, it ends up being, and I don't know if this is the right word to use, but it almost is. It's like, I feel wrong to use this word because it's like, it's sad, but it literally makes the results pointless, which makes it
Mm,
even sadder, right? Because yeah, they don't tell you anything about soldiers. They literally just tell you how a starving, traumatized body is going to fail under these extreme conditions like hypothermia. But on top of that, pain and fear, they activate the sympathetic nervous system, which increases adrenaline and cortisol levels, which actually further constricts blood vessels and reduces blood flow to the skin, which makes the frostbite more severe and also more rapid. So the experimental conditions themselves amplified the injury that they were supposedly trying to measure. So what Unit 731 produced was not meaningful medical insight. It was literally just a detailed record of suffering written in anatomical language. Written in anatomical language. And just like with the disease experiments, once they convinced themselves that this counted as research, the escalation didn't stop. And so hypothermia experiments blurred into studies of endurance, trauma, and how long a body could survive under combined stress. At which point, the distinction between experimentation and torture literally just disappeared entirely. So one of the other categories involves severe dehydration, where obviously prisoners were denied water for extended periods while being monitored. So the researchers tracked weight loss, urine output, blood concentration, and eventually organ failure. And what they claimed they were studying was fluid balance and survival thresholds. But what they actually were observing was, again, predictable multi-organ collapse caused by prolonged water deprivation. They then moved into weapon and gun research. So by the late 1930s, Japan was engaged in prolonged ground warfare across China, and soldiers were not only dying from infection, but they were also dying from things like blast injuries, burns, gunshot wounds, obviously, and the infections that followed that trauma. And so Unit 731 claimed that they could actually improve battlefield medicine by understanding how different weapons damage the body and then how those injuries progressed over time. So that claim then eventually ended up becoming the justification for weapon experiments that happened in Unit 731. And I know I've already given a content warning, but just another content warning because what I'm about to tell you is horrific. But essentially, some of these weapon experiments involved prisoners being restrained and arranged in concentric rings around live grenades. Researchers would set off the grenade and then they would record who died immediately, who survived the initial blast, and how injuries developed over time, including bleeding, infection, and organ damage. And survival was not the goal, observation was literally the goal. They essentially just wanted to see like how close you could be to this live grenade before you died or before you would get an injury that would eventually kill you. Other prisoners were also reportedly deliberately shot, stabbed, or burned under controlled conditions.
Gosh.
So surgeons could study wound progression and attempted interventions. And in some cases, surgery was performed, but not obviously with the aim of saving life, but to observe how long someone could survive with specific injuries and complications. So they said they were studying trauma response and surgical technique, but in reality, the conditions bore little resemblance to obviously real combat, because in real combat, you're not arranged in rings around a grenade.
Yeah, that is so messed up.
And so a similar pattern from a physiological standpoint, obviously the data could not be reliably applied to battlefield medicine. And as with the earlier disease experiments, the work continued, not because it produced useful knowledge, but because there were literally no constraints left to stop it. And this is all kind of reminding me a little bit of like the psychology behind like the Stanford prison experiment, because I also wonder like to what extent they were all just kind of like encouraging each other to just get worse and worse and worse. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I keep thinking about the Tuskegee syphilis study. Obviously, it was completely different context, different scale, but it was a similar logic in that, like, there was a group that was in power decides that this massive population is completely expendable, withholds care, observes suffering, and then ultimately the people they're observing die, or I mean, some didn't die, like, fortunately, but a lot of them did, and then tells themselves it's justified because they're collecting data, which just is so crazy to me.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that actually, because the thing about Unit 731 is that, like, obviously what was going on in the facility was horrible, but actually by the early 1940s, they believed that they had understood biological weapons well enough to actually test them outside of the lab. So that they fully believed that what they were doing was great. But that's when we started seeing deliberate attacks on civilian populations, and we spoke about these before, but one of the most documented cases is the cholera outbreak in Changde in 1941, which actually killed thousands of people. But it wasn't an isolated incident, because at least 11 Chinese cities were targeted using biological agents. We had things like they were literally just dropping like plague infected fleas from ceramic bombs. They were
What?
leaving like contaminated food and water supplies in populated areas. And I even heard about a story where they were actually handing out poisoned candy to children. So these were obviously not accidents or unintended spillovers. They were literally field trials.
Yeah, and they're not observing the disease anymore. They're literally actively deploying it to population.
Yep, 100%. It's just literally insane. It does feel like it feels like a conspiracy theory, but it's true. And while this is
Mm.
happening, the researchers they're publishing their papers. Their findings are appearing in medical journals describing the effects of specific diseases under supposedly controlled conditions. But the crucial lie is actually in the methods. So the experiments are described as having been carried out on long-tailed primates or Manchurian monkeys. So they're quite literally saying that they're carrying these studies out on monkeys, while
Oh my gosh.
in reality the data is coming from human beings. And that actually meant that results could circulate within the scientific community without immediate suspicion, detached from the absolute violence that actually produced those results. And this is one of the
That's
reasons that Unit
crazy.
731 is still discussed in bioethics today, because the questions becomes, not just what happened, but whether data attained through extreme abuse can ever actually be separated from its origins. And this is also where the comparison to Auschwitz becomes unavoidable, because like the Nazi camps, some of the experiments at Unit 731 had no credible scientific purpose at all. As we've discussed, prisoners were subjected to amputations, sometimes with the limbs reattached to the wrong side of the body, quite literally just to see what would happen. Organs were removed and rearranged. These weren't studies designed to answer medical questions. They were driven by what one former staff member later described as professional curiosity.
Yeah, this is actually wild, and it is crazy like how similar the parallels are to what we've already discussed about Auschwitz. And yeah, this is
Yeah.
so crazy. So how did this actually end? Did anyone try and stop it from the inside? Like, what happened?
Yeah, so like the Zonga Fortress, there were small acts of resistance, and some staff later testified that prisoners did try to resist and they tried to escape. But others described moments where individuals quite literally begged to be shot rather than be used for experiments. But
Oh
there
my
was
God.
no organized internal shutdown. What ended Unit 731 wasn't justice, it was actually just geopolitics. Because in 1945, Japan surrendered at the end of the Second World War, and as defeat became inevitable, staff at Unit 731 decided they had to destroy records. So they burned all of the documents, and they unfortunately executed all the remaining prisoners to eliminate any witnesses.
Oh my
And the
God.
facility was quite literally just basically abandoned almost overnight.
So what happened to the guy leading it, Ishi Shiro?
Oh, I feel like this is literally the most sad part about the story, because he was arrested by US forces after the war, but he was actually never tried for his war crimes. Instead, he actually ended up
What?
negotiating a deal with them. Yeah. So in exchange for immunity, he basically said, like, if you give me immunity, I'll hand you over the data and I'll tell you what went on in Unit 731. So the reasoning was that the information might actually be useful for American biological weapons research. Obviously, we now know that it turned out that was never the case, but he actually lived the rest of his life completely free. He was also very wealthy. And many other scientists involved in Unit 731 also avoided prosecution and went on to hold senior medical or academic positions in post war Japan. Some of them were tried for their war
What?
crimes, but a lot of them actually got away with it.
What on earth? That is
I
like
know.
the most outrageous thing I've ever heard. How, like
I
you,
know.
oh my God, I don't even know how to even imagine like unknowingly beating this person who you think is like, I don't know, a, a senior professor, and actually like 10 years
This is what they
before
were
he
involved
was
in.
like
I know, it's literally
torturing
crazy.
humans.
Obviously, I just said about how like they like he basically said he would like tell them what happened and whatever. But when the American scientists actually reviewed any of the remaining data, they found it as expected. They found it added literally almost nothing. Well, literally nothing to existing knowledge. Because as we said before, the experiments lacked controls, reproducibility, and biological validity. So tens of thousands of people were tortured and killed for data
Tens of
that
thousands.
advanced neither medicine nor science. And I think that's where we have to sit with this, because Unit 731 didn't teach us anything meaningful about disease, trauma, or the limits of the human body. But what it exposed was how easily scientific language can be used to disguise cruelty, and how dangerous research becomes when ethics are
Mm.
treated as optional. And if there's any reason to tell this story, it's not because the experiments mattered, but because the people who entered Unit 731 did. Remembering Unit 731 isn't about honouring the science, it's about making sure we never confuse authority with legitimacy or data with truth ever again.
That is absolutely insane. Like, I think it's so crazy how he wasn't even tried and he was just left. Oh, don't even know. Have no words. And actually, to dehumanize them so much to describe them as monkeys is literally insane. Like, so insane.
Yeah, like, yeah,
I'm
it's
not
just,
over it.
it's like one of those stories that you just don't even know what to say. You don't even know how to respond to it. Like this is, I mean, like you said it earlier when we've been researching these stories, like they do stick with you. Like all week I have been thinking about all of the different stories that I've read. And then last night I had the question where I was like, actually, what happened to him? And so that's what I went to read about. I was like, hey, actually, what happened to him? Like, did he get tried for his war crimes? Was he killed at the end of the war? Like, what happened? And when I read this, honestly, I was so annoyed. I was so annoyed. And I was just like gobsmacked. I had to fact check it because I was like, surely not. Like, literally, surely not. But yeah.
So how old was he when he died? Was he old?
I think, yeah, he was quite old. I can't remember the exact age, but he was like, he made it to old age. Yeah.
Oh my God, that's actually crazy. I mean,
I know.
despite like the horrific ending, I think this is obviously why we always platform these kind of stories to like, I don't know, like shed some light on, I don't know, the horrific past of science, because actually I would say a lot of science in the past was quite horrific,
A lot
to
of
be
it.
honest. And I think
100%.
like ethics has come so far now, thankfully, and it just means that we do better science. So yeah, I think this is just a case of complete disgusting morbid curiosity, but obviously it is important to highlight this and highlight how
Very important.
ethics
Yeah.
has changed so much and how it's shaped science today. If you want to read up a bit more about this, there'll always be some links in the description for this episode. But for now, I think we'll move on to a bit of a lighter note, try and end the podcast on a bit of a lighter note, as we always do. And this week, we've got a listener story for our laboratory. So let's get into it. But I'm worth it, 'cause I'll slip into your dreams tonight. Oh, so give me Okay, so here's the tea. I'll refer to my supervisor as Beverly and one of my lab colleagues who's relevant here as Gavin. So starting with the first incident, Beverly was initially very nice and welcoming, but there were red flags that I didn't notice at the time, me being the oblivious person I was. She constantly talks behind the backs of other faculty members, other students, and even PhD scholars, calling them very low or incompetent. Another red flag was her behaviour towards a postdoc in our lab. She tried to seduce him, despite them being married. He eventually left the lab, and Beverly got so offended that she refused to give him his experience certificate and started an entire tirade against him. I really should have learned from that, but I didn't. Sorry, that is wild.
What? That's giving pick me energy. It's giving pick me.
Yeah. Most of us live off campus and rent places nearby. I used to stay at the lab late at night, sometimes honestly until 12 a.m., and then drive home. It was about 15 minutes through really unsafe areas, and being a woman, it wasn't safe for me to go alone that late. The postdoc used to drive alongside me in his own vehicle whilst I drove mine, so at least
What?
someone
Sorry,
was
sorry,
around.
sorry, sorry. Wait, what? No, I'm not laughing. I'm not laughing. Carry on. I have pause, but carry on. Why do you have to
I'm so
drive?
confused.
Right?
Where are
It's
you
not just me.
driving?
Where are you driving? Why is someone driving next to you? Like, what do you think's I don't get it. Carry on. Let's hear the rest. Let's keep going.
Anyway, she goes on to say, this actually helped me because I was followed 3 times. Once I didn't even notice, but because he was there, he handled it. I'm so
Okay.
confused about this being in a car because I'm like, yeah, fair enough if you're walking. If you're walking somewhere, fair enough. But like, what do you mean you were followed in the car?
Where is this university?
Maybe it's like America or somewhere. Because I
Okay.
could maybe picture that a bit more. I don't know.
Okay.
But because
Let's
he
roll
used
with
to help
it.
me get home safely, Beverly redirected all her anger towards me. I became the scapegoat of the lab. Anything that went wrong, even things done by undergrads I had nothing to do with, I was the one who got bullied. Later, I found out that Gavin had been feeding Beverly lies about me. Gavin was jealous because I was Beverly's first student, and Beverly was initially nicer to me, partly because I helped others in the lab whenever I could. Gavin resented that, and they manipulated the situation. Eventually, several new members joined the lab. Another postdoc, an intern who wanted to do a PhD, another PhD student, and around 6 or 7 other interns.
Damn,
Lately,
that's a big
another
lab.
PhD. I was going to say that's a big lab.
Okay.
Lately, another PhD student joined as well. Gavin has been convincing almost all of them to leave the lab. They pretended to be nice in front of Beverly, but they're the one who's been ruining the lab environment, influencing others to quit and telling Beverly that I'm the one trying to drive everyone away. What the heck?
What is going on? What is going on in the House of Commons? Honestly, this is a lot. This
is a lot. And now the spicy part, as if we haven't already had spicy. Okay. I'm so confused. Speaking of spicy, I just ate something really spicy, so apologies if I'm like... Anyway, Beverly has been involved with other people on campus despite being married. Oh, okay, this is spicy.
Whoosh! Okay.
She believes that Gavin is the only one who knows because Gavin walked in on her and kept her secret. Mate, maybe Gavin wrote in.
Wait.
We actually had a story about someone walking in on 2 people, having fun in the lab.
Oh my god, I remember that one. Wait, imagine if it is. No, stop, because it was the boots banging on the drawers. It was that one. The gloves. Oh my god. Did you say anything about having gloves on? Imagine.
Okay.
Academia is a small world. Do you know what I mean? Like, how many people are banging on the drawers? How many people's boots are banging on the drawers?
Well,
Can't be that many.
To be fair, that person didn't say that one of them was married, so maybe it's just happening a lot. But yeah, she goes on to say,
banging on the lab benches. Can we please stop banging on the lab benches, guys?
Like, let's keep it sanitary, guys.
There's so many reasons to not be doing that.
I'm like doing my experiments on that. I don't want to see any residual stuff there. Thank you very much. Anyway, she goes on to say, but in reality, Gavin has told practically everyone on campus. I heard it through a long chain of mutual friends, so it's definitely not a secret anymore. I mean, sorry, they're never those types of secrets are never secrets. I hate to say it, everyone knows about those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And they have both been spreading lies and rumors about me being because I am nice to people
can I just say, like, I only accept use of the words in a good way.
Yeah, same.
I do not accept the use of the words in a bad way. Just want to say that.
Yeah, this is actually like really wild. So not only are they spreading rumors about Beverly, the married supervisor, but they're also spreading rumors about the listener apparently being us because they are nice to people in general, including the male colleagues who maintain the boundaries of professionalism. I am married, for God's sake, and it is a well-known fact among my friends and colleagues. I mean, to be fair, it didn't actually stop your supervisor, so yeah. So basically, they have been trying to brand me as the person they are. Oh, savage. Ooh. Oh, and both sabotage my work by not purchasing stuff I need or by straightforwardly deleting data. What? This is actually wild. This is wild now. So that's what's been happening. Beverly is problematic, but Gavin is, well, a nightmare. He always is, to be fair. It's not tea at this point. It's a literal lifetime supply of trauma. I used to be completely fine when I joined in my first and second years, but now, after major surgery and multiple health issues, honestly, name a lifestyle-related health condition and I probably have it, I'm still trying my best and giving whatever I can. And because I'm finally prioritizing my health, I've been called unprofessional. After everything I've gone through, that's what I get. I am truly triggered.
I've got one question.
To digest here.
Oh, it's so much to digest. I've got one question. Is the PhD worth it? Do you know what I mean?
I agree.
What I want to know, which I don't think they've told us, is how much longer they've got in this lab. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, because she's
That's
said that she's obviously done her first and second years, so maybe she's in third or fourth. So it's like, babes,
right, but if
just
she's in
plow
America,
through. Oh yeah,
she's got another 3 years. If you're in the UK, you're pretty much done. And I feel like this is a key piece of information
we
to
actually
destroy.
always forget about that aspect on this podcast. I
We
always
do,
just
don't
like
we?
think about PhDs are like 3-4 years long, but
7
people in
years of
America,
PhD,
no,
that is hell. That is hell. I'm sorry, but
no
is the
way.
PhD actually worth it to be 3 years? I mean, most people end up doing 3.5 in the UK, but by that 3 year mark, girl, I was ready to throw in that towel. I didn't need that PhD that bad. I don't care.
Yeah,
But I can't imagine getting to year 7. I would, nah, I couldn't.
yeah, that is crazy.
I actually could not.
I
I
mean,
don't
I'm
even know
still a
where to
little bit
start
hung
first.
up on the car situation and how
Can
they
we,
were
let's go
driving
back to the
side
car.
by side.
I've got to go back to the
Because
car.
I think this must be in America, because I'm like, what road other than like a motorway has like multiple lanes in on like one road?
Okay, what I will say is driving out of my uni for a while, there's 2 lanes.
But is it like a motorway or?
It's like, no, it's not a motorway and it's not a dual carriageway because the speed limit is not 70.
Okay, fine. But yeah, I also feel like, I don't know.
No, let's discuss the car because why is he I do think maybe I'm just focusing on something that doesn't need to be focused on, but why is he following like driving next to you in the car? I'm so confused. Who is following you? What kind of uni? This is what I'm thinking is what kind of uni is a really like they must be quite a big uni with a lot of money because this
Yeah.
is a big lab. There's a lot of people who have just come into that lab. So they've got money. They're obviously doing great research. Where is this uni that you can't even drive 15 minutes away without
Mm,
like and this is not me invalidating her experience at all. I'm just genuinely shocked
yeah,
because
curious.
and maybe that's just like we just sound like really privileged because we've never experienced that. But I do think it's like being in the UK, that's like a really like or it's not the right word. That's a really like unexpected thing. But maybe
Mm.
we'll just move on
I
from the
think
car.
like walking home, I completely understand. Like, I would
Yeah.
not want to be walking home at like midnight, 1 a.m. if I've had like a late day in the lab. And yeah, I drive home. So yeah, I don't know. That is very bizarre to me. But then it's also then bizarre that your married supervisor would then get jealous of you for doing that with the postdoc that
And then
she
she tried to seduce the
gives
postdoc.
him.
Can you imagine? I mean, we have heard so many stories on this podcast. One that always sticks in my brain was the guy who got one of his postdocs pregnant. That one always sticks in my brain. So this kind of stuff is happening quite obviously more often than we think. I mean, work romances, they're a very big thing. People get very bored at work. It happens. But can you imagine being like your PhD supervisor trying to seduce you? I also feel like as a male and female, like that's like a dynamic that we don't often hear about is like a female
Yeah.
supervisor trying to seduce the postdoc. But I wonder where this information has come from. Is it him that's telling people?
Mm.
Or but then it seems like
Yeah.
quite a common trend with her that this is something that she's doing and she seems like she has some very odd behavior characteristics. But how did she try to seduce him? Like, I want to know.
But then, right, one thing I'm going to point out here is, and this is like a big hole in the story in my mind,
Okay.
is
I think there's a few, but yeah,
obviously
go on.
rumors have been flying around about the listener that she claims are not true. So I'm like, you do get labs that just gossip, 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 and like it gets to a point where it's like Chinese whispers and people are
Hmm.
saying things that are completely
Yeah,
untrue. So
yeah.
it's like, how is that? How can you not necessarily think that that could be happening to the supervisor as well?
Right. Yeah,
The
yeah. Yeah, it's
seductive
like
supervisor.
That's such a good point. That is such a good point because, yeah, if there's lies about me going around, then I'm going to question what everybody's saying about other people. 100%.
Also, she literally said as well that obviously Gavin supposedly walked in on Beverly having some fun, even though she's married, but she got her information through like a long line of mutuals. So it's like Chinese whispers definitely could have happened there, you know? Sounds like a really
Also,
gossipy lab, in my opinion.
where is Gavin walking in on? Like, where is he walking in on her? Like, was it in the lab? Was it in the office? Where did this happen? I just want to say something about. I feel as though every single person in this lab is giving pick me energy. The supervisor's giving pick me energy. Gavin's giving pick me energy. Can I be really brutal
Oh,
and say that? Don't hate me for saying this because I don't mean this in a horrible way, but okay, everybody's giving pick me energy. Everybody involved in this whole story is giving pick me energy.
yeah.
Like it all
So
seems
what
like
makes you say that? Come on, break it
I
down.
feel like everybody is searching for validation in one way or another. Okay, we go back to Beverly. Beverly tries to seduce the postdoc. The postdoc then leaves the lab. Beverly is then offended. She's offended because she's a pick-me, right? Gavin is spreading rumors and telling everybody everybody's business because he's a pick-me and he wants attention and he wants to be like, I'm in the know. I know this, blah, 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 blah. All the new people who have joined the lab, they're telling Beverly that that the listener who's wrote in is trying to get everyone to leave the lab, which is giving pick me energy because they're like telling on the listener to Beverly, right? So everybody in the story is giving pick me energy, in my opinion. And then I can't lie, please don't be offended because I don't mean this in an offensive way, but then also kind of a bit of a pick me energy from you because you're saying that sounds so horrible. I don't mean it horribly, but because you're concerned about Gavin being like the second student and like you're saying about how you used to be the first student. So I'm not saying that everybody in the story is giving pick me energy to offend you, but what I'm saying is I think your supervisor has created an environment where all of you are in your pick me era. You're all wanting to be picked because she's created such a toxic environment that all of you, whether you know it or not, you all seem to be in competition with each other to be Beverly's favorite. But at the same time, none of you like Beverly because you said yourself, Beverly is problematic. And then it's like Gavin is making this situation worse. But really, when I deeply think about it, I think you're most annoyed at Gavin because you want to be picked by Beverly, but you don't even like Beverly. Does this make any sense, what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying. Yeah, 100%. Like the environment that's being created is so toxic. And on top of that, like not only is it giving like you're competing for the attention of the supervisor, but also it seems like such a toxic lab because there's so many rumors going around. Like, take it from me, I have been in a lab where literally multiple times a week there was this new rumor or new thing to talk about. Yeah, and it was so stressful. Like, obviously doing a PhD at the same time is like even more intense, but like just being in a lab environment where literally every day there is some form of new gossip, you kind of have to, at that point, for your own mental health, just take a step back and actually just start not getting involved in the drama. Because the more you like, I found as well, like if something's said and then someone will repeat what you said and then it will set off a chain reaction of like Chinese whispers, people will twist your words. And I think, yeah, sometimes it's just easier being like, and I'm pretty much like this a lot of the time now, where I will either like openly say what I've said to other people in the lab, or I'll just be that person who's just like not involved. And like if people are gossiping to me about something, I'll be like, no way. But like I won't do that myself. I'm just not that person
I feel like
anymore.
That's such a powerful thing as well, because we've all been in that situation. I don't care what anyone says. We've all been in that situation where we've gone to gossip with someone and then they don't gossip with you, and then you feel like you feel like such an idiot. You're like, oh my God, I'm such a child. And it's so embarrassing. So,
I mean, look,
I
us.
feel like
We love the goss. Like, this
we
is
love
why
the
we're
goss.
doing the podcast. But I just think at work, when it's already like a really toxic, gossipy environment, you've just got to set a place where you're just like, I'm not getting involved because it's like making me go like a bit mentally insane. I feel like that's kind of what's happened with the listener here. Is obviously happened
100%.
with their colleagues as well, and they're all kind of like low-key hating on each other because they're all gossiping about each other.
Yes,
and it's like,
because Beverly's created this environment. And if we do take these rumors about Beverly, I'm taking them with a pinch of salt for the reasons that we said, but let's say that they are true. I would say that if they are true, that is even more indicative of the fact that she is quite clearly creating a very toxic environment. Because if she is at the point where she's pushing the boundaries of her professionalism so much to the point where she is literally having an affair while she's at work, like, I don't doubt for a second that she is creating this really toxic environment. But either way, I will 100%, I do think that if you have a lab this big and everybody in the lab is involved in this to some extent, like, I do blame the supervisor for that, because I know that, like, in my lab, for example, if there was any disagreements or anything like that, my supervisor was very on it, and he was very good at ensuring that all of us maintained professionalism within the group and with each other. And that is the job of the supervisor as head of the lab group at the end of the day. So yeah, I think, as we said, number one thing is to realize that Beverly is the reason that you're all hating on each other, 100%. So then it's like, do we get away from Beverly? Can we get away from Beverly? This is the main question, because it's like, how long do you have left? So if we can get away from Beverly, and we're getting away from Beverly in, like, well, it doesn't matter the time frame. It's just, how do we deal with it? How does she distance herself? And how does she stop getting so offended by what's going on? Which, by the way, I'm not invalidating. I also would be offended. But
well, she says herself that she's triggered. And I think that's exactly what's happening here. Is
that's
that,
the
like,
problem, right?
everything is
Everybody's
triggering
triggered
at this point, and everyone's triggered. So I just think if you are close to finishing, just power through, keep your head down. You know, like, you've got to do it for yourself, kind of thing. And sometimes you need to know when to take a step away from, like, all the drama. And it is possible to step away from all the drama. Just, like, don't, like, give your energy to it, you know what I mean? And you will just kind of, I think it's very easy as scientists to kind of, like, I don't know, fall into the background of a situation, because we can do that. Like, you can go off, do your experiments, whatever time of, especially when you're a PhD student, you can do your experiments whenever you want. Go in at the weekend if you want to. Like, not that we really condone that on this podcast, but, like, if it's for the sake of your mental health, then maybe you should consider, like, going in the lab when not loads of people are there and things like that. Not to do extra work. But yeah. What do you think, Liv?
I agree. And I think sit back and really ask yourself, like, have I maybe engaged with this a little bit too much? Maybe the answer is no, maybe the answer is yes. But sometimes I've been in this exact situation where I sit back and I think, actually, I have engaged in this too much. And maybe that's why this situation has continued to work. So if you feel like that is you, then yeah, definitely take a step back. The next time someone comes to gossip with you, you can just be like, oh, I'm really sorry, I'm really busy right now. You don't even have to say, I don't want to engage in this. You just, oh, sorry, I'm really busy. Move on. I guess the other problem is the fact that she's saying about how her work, she feels like her work is being sabotaged. So it's like she can distance herself from the drama and look at the bigger picture of what's going on. But then, like, if you have people who aren't purchasing stuff for you, they're deleting your data, then that adds like,
that is wild layer. Deleting your data,
that is freaking wild.
I don't even know, I don't know what, how. Yeah, that's just a whole nother level. I mean, obviously that's crazy. I think not purchasing stuff, just purchase it yourself. Like, it's not hard to put. I just think,
I think she just needs to step into her, like, her sorry to use
independent era,
her bossage era. Do you know what I mean? Like, stop being bullied about. Like, literally, stop getting involved in the drama. purchase your own things where and if you can. And if someone's not purchasing it for you, like confront them, literally confront them. Like I think no one in this situation is taking control of the situation, because as I said before, they're taking control of the situation. So at this point, I'm going to take control of the situation. Like, I'm going to be that person at work who is acting like the boss when they're not the boss. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, I will be pulling you to the side. Why did you didn't do this? You didn't purchase this. This is affecting XYZ, blah, blah. Like, just stop letting people get away with stuff. I feel like it sounds like you need to stand up for yourself more.
Yeah.
And
or just purchase it for
your own
yourself
feelings.
and then like put it in your own box and don't tell anyone you've purchased it. Like, a lot of people do generally hoard stuff for themselves if they've ordered it, and they'll keep like a secret stash of backup reagents or
That's a good
something,
idea.
because
I mean, obviously that's so toxic that she has to do that, but yeah, I think really, like, step back. See, it's hard to answer because we don't know how much time you've got. If you've got like 6 months, we're going to say like power through, just be a bitch for the next 6 months because it's going to help you get through. But if you've got like 3 years, then obviously you don't want to make the situation any worse. So it's a bit more difficult. So I think you need to ask yourself how long you've got left. If it's realistically, can you be a bitch and power through? By the way, I don't mean that in like a bad way. Like, I love being a bitch. Be a bitch in the workplace. Sometimes that's what you got to do. Do what you got to do. Or is it just that like you've got another 3 years, and in this case, is it actually worth it? Is it actually worth it? And if it's, you could, go and speak to external people in your university as well, other, like the dean, your head of department, other PIs, let them know what the situation is, and just see, even if you can get like an extra supervisor involved who's just gonna like help disconnect you from that situation a little bit. So think about how much time you've got, look at your options, and just ask yourself, is this all really worth it? But I think the main thing to realize here is that Beverly is cultivating a very toxic environment that I think, understandably, you've got a little bit wrapped up in. But that's that's fine. Loads of people would have done the exact same thing, so don't feel bad about that. But I think it's just an important thing to recognize. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I think you summed it up nicely.
Yeah. So I think, have a think about those things. And also, if you want to email in and give us any more context and let us know how long you have left, we will 100% revisit this story, because listen, there's a lot to break down here. And I just think there's like, the advice that we give you is so dependent on that. So if you want to write back in letting us know how long you've got left, we will.
And also, if you're annoyed at Liv for calling you a pick-me.
Oh my God, don't be annoyed. Please don't be annoyed at me, because I don't mean it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I am that friend who, I'll be honest with you. Like, I will be honest with you. And my wording isn't always great, because I struggle to be honest, but at the same time, I'm always going to be honest. Do you know what I mean?
Always
sometimes I'm being honest, but the way I say it comes across wrong. So like, I don't actually think you're a pick me, but like, I'm just trying to make you recognize that I think you've gotten a bit too deep. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's all love. Like, I love you. I'm just trying to help you recognize what's going on here. Yeah. Also, like, we've all been a bit of a pick me sometimes. Like, it's fine.
Oh, we've all recognize. Especially in your PhD. Human. I feel like PhD students in general are so pick me. They're like, yeah, I'm 100%. Doing a PhD. Now that I'm a postdoc, I'm like, babe, tone it down a bit, all right?
I was a pick me for like the first 2 years of my the whole of my PhD I was a pick me. Like, it's the nature of being a PhD student. You've got to be a bit of a pick me sometimes to get through. So no hate. You be a pick me, girl. But I do think you should be a bitch for the next 6 months. But anyway, we don't know how long you've got left. So write back in. And if any of our other listeners, if you're listening along and you think I have a similar story, or you've got maybe a completely different story that you think you could really use some advice on, or maybe you just want to give us the tea, because as me and Taz said, we love the tea, hence the LABORATEA section. So if that's you, you can find an anonymous link in today's episode or video description where you can submit your own story, and me and Taz will give you our thoughts. But for now, that rounds up the penultimate episode of season 7 Twisted. So make sure you guys join us for next week, the last episode of season 7, and then we will be taking a short break before we return with season 8. So we will see you guys same time next week. Bye everyone.
Bye.